A massive blue thunderbolt split the sky open as it descended toward the ground alongside a man's fist, crashing violently amidst the heavy rain. In the heart of the chaos, a lone man hurled his fist into the earth, shattering it beneath the force of his strike. He was known not by name but by title, the Fist King. A legend in the martial world, he was the one who had subdued the entire Zhonghu, using nothing but his bare fists. That title followed him more faithfully than his own name. He stood firm under the downpour, dangerous eyes glowing faintly, his aura tinged with flickering blue light. He exhaled, both hands wrapped tightly in thick bandages, and from his right hand, electric sparks danced and cracked in rhythm with the thunder above. This was Dan Wusung, the man the world called the Fist King. But in the next moment, his expression faltered. A sharp pain struck his abdomen, and blood began to trickle down. He had been wounded. It was an ambush, quick and well-planned. A mysterious group had attacked him, and only two enemies remained. Two men stood across from him, their skills apparent in the way they carried themselves. Their origins were still unclear. Among the corpses around him, the Fist King selected one of the fallen and hurled it toward the remaining pair. He was returning one of their own. The man, still barely conscious, looked toward the one called the Sword Demon, begging for help. But help never came. Instead, the Sword Demon drew his blade and cut the man down without hesitation, killing his own subordinate in a single stroke. Watching this unfold, the Fist King immediately understood the kind of opponent he was dealing with. Anyone capable of dispatching an ally so easily was not bound by honor. From the hilt of the Sword Demon's weapon, a charm dangled, a tag etched with the character for blood. That, combined with the cruel efficiency of the strike, confirmed the truth. It was the mark of the demonic faction. He had seen enough. The Sword Demon descended from his high perch and stepped forward. He is impressed by how long the Fist King had endured. But the Fist King cut him off. He declared that he would end this fight in 10 attacks or less. The Sword Demon dismissed the claim as arrogance and lunged. Their battle began. The Fist King moved swiftly. He dodged the incoming blade and surged forward with explosive force, his fist landing squarely in the center of the Sword Demon's chest. Blood sprayed from the man's mouth as he reeled from the impact, stunned by the speed and strength behind the blow. The Fist King began counting. 1. He followed up with another strike. 2. And then another. 3. Each blow landed with brutal efficiency, each one counted aloud in rhythm. 4. 5. 6. By the 9th hit, he had struck the Sword Demon's body repeatedly, each impact echoing across the storm. But something felt wrong. Despite landing so many clean hits, none had struck the weakest points. It was as if his movements were being restricted. That's when he noticed it. Thin threads had been wrapped around his arms, subtle but strong, interfering with his precision. His focus shifted to the man who stood above, the second enemy. It was him. He had been using a skill to restrain the Fist King with threads, and in that one instant of distraction, the Sword Demon acted. His blade pierced straight through the Fist King's chest, the metal gliding deep into flesh. The Fist King coughed up blood, his hand instinctively grabbing the blade that now jutted out of him. The Sword Demon stood close, speaking as if delivering a verdict. This, he claimed, was the end of the Fist King's reign. But before he could finish that thought, he was caught off guard. Despite the fatal wound, the Fist King's right hand ignited with power. He threw a punch with everything he had left. It landed hard. The Sword Demon staggered backward. The hit had connected. And then the Fist King collapsed. The Sword Demon's ally watched with unease. He admitted that things could have ended dangerously if not for their timing. The Sword Demon was clearly irritated, blaming the close call on someone else's interference. He stepped forward, poking the Fist King's lifeless body, mocking him and remarking that if he were going to die, he should hurry up and do it. But the Fist King wasn't done yet. From the ground, he suddenly sprang to life, his fist rising upward in a final act of defiance. It crashed into the Sword Demon's chin with staggering force. 10. That was the last punch. And with it, the Fist King's body gave out. His strength faded. He collapsed fully now, his consciousness drifting away. As the world dimmed, he thought only of one thing. He wished he could have landed one more hit, just one more, and then everything went dark. Dan Wusung, the Fist King, was dead, struck down by the demonic faction. Elsewhere, in a remote safe house nestled within Yuhua Mountain, a young woman stood beside a bed. The man in the bed stirred, eyes fluttering open. As he tried to comprehend her voice, she kept asking if he was all right. When he finally woke, his mind was a fog. He didn't know where he was or how he had been treated. He sat upright, holding his head as if it throbbed. Instinctively, he reached down to his abdomen. There was no wound, no pain, no scar. The woman continued to call him Master and asked if she should fetch water. He agreed absently, but his attention was fixed on what she had called him. First young master? It didn't make sense. As he drank the water, he caught sight of himself in a mirror. What he saw made him choke and spit. His face and body were gaunt, his cheekbones pronounced. He looked unrecognizable. He touched his face, pulling at the skin, convinced that someone had placed a mask over it. But there was no seam, no edge. This wasn't a mask. The girl panicked at his reaction and ran from the room to call for the physician, closing the door behind her. She whispered to herself on how he seemed strange today. He began piecing things together. If the demonic faction were behind this, it would make no sense. If they had such power, they would have already taken over the Jianghu. That left one possibility, one that he almost didn't want to believe. He looked into the mirror again and asked himself who he was really looking at. He searched the room for answers, but even the body didn't feel like his. He was used to muscle, power, presence. This felt weak, like that of a sickly fawn. It was garbage. On the table, he spotted a note. On the cover was the name, the Yuna Merchant Group. He recognized it, a powerful trading group near Juhua Mountain. Even someone like him, who had nothing to do with merchants, had heard of them. The letters inside were addressed to the owner of this body, Li Jinian, the eldest son. He was all about money, gambling, women. The man was a failure through and through. That was all he could gather from the letters. This wasn't sorcery. It wasn't a mask. He didn't sense any energy inside him. Could it be reincarnation? The thought sounded insane, but it was the only one that made sense. A man entered, addressing him as First Young Master again. He rushed in, clearly panicked. This must have been the physician. He checked on him, wiping away tears, saying that he had heard something was off. The Fist King stared, trying to figure out who the man was. As the physician reached for his hand, he pulled away, brushing him off and insisting that he was fine. Before leaving, the man mentioned that he had prepared a familiar meal. He told the maids to bring it in. Chicken soup, good for invigorating the body. The dish was called Dragon and Phoenix Soup. It was perfect for the healthy, but for someone as weak as Li Jinian, it was basically poison. He realized then that the physician had tried to take his pulse earlier, likely noticing something strange. The man was a snake, with a fake smile and a hidden agenda. He claimed that if he kept eating the soup, he'd be strong enough to compete in the Dragon Phoenix martial competition. The Fist King asked how long that competition had been running. The physician's smile faded slightly. He answered carefully, about 200 years. That was all the Fist King needed to know. The Fist King tried to dismiss them, claiming he had no appetite, and ordered the man to leave. The physician tried to protest, but he was already being pushed out. Once the door closed, the Fist King stood in silence. It had only been 200 competitions. That meant his death hadn't been long ago. The demonic faction was likely still alive, and the snake-like physician was proof that he was surrounded by the same kinds of people, ones who needed to be crushed. He clenched his fist. This time, he'd kill them all with a single strike. The table was filled with a variety of food far greater than the villa had prepared in the past. The three maidservants stood to the side, surprised and somewhat delighted as they watched him eat. His appetite was vigorous, completely unlike before, when he barely touched anything beyond plain porridge. One maid leaned toward the other, whispering how lively he seemed now, noting that he should be back from his walk soon. Just then, the door opened. He entered topless, his figure lean but defined, his posture confident. Seeing that they had already prepared breakfast, he commended them and looked over the spread. With a brief nod of approval, he instructed them to keep the meals this simple moving forward. They responded affirmatively, then stepped aside and whispered again amongst themselves as he began dressing. To them, it was clear the young master had truly grown healthier. Outside the room, the physician waited. He called out, announcing his presence, but received no reply. The Fist King, uninterested in entertaining him, continued eating in silence. But the maids turned to him again, politely asking what he would like to do. Reluctantly, he told them to let the physician in. The physician entered with a neutral expression, but the moment he saw the man eating at the table, his demeanor shifted. An exaggerated smile stretched across his face. The Fist King observed him carefully, still unable to understand why the man groveled so much. But an idea began to form in his mind. He would draw the rat out. The time had come to test him. With a calm gesture, he sipped his tea and asked what the physician wanted. The man burst into a dramatic mix of laughter and tears, claiming he had felt lonely without hearing from him and simply couldn't stay away. Then he commented on how drastically his complexion had improved, complaining that all his efforts now felt wasted. The word effort caught the Fist King's attention. He narrowed his eyes and asked what he meant by that. His gaze turned cold as he pressed further, asking if those efforts included trying to seduce him with dragon phoenix soup. The physician froze in disbelief and stammered that there must be some misunderstanding. That soup, he claimed, was a nourishing tonic. The Fist King responded sharply, questioning whether he thought it was poison. The physician panicked and pleaded that he was his personal physician, that he would never harm him. Holding his hands to his face, he feigned despair and offered to leave if he was no longer welcome. He turned to go, but the Fist King called his name. The physician stopped. He was asked why he had come without being summoned, and now why he was attempting to leave without permission. Was he the master now? The question landed heavily. The physician turned serious and bowed, muttering an apology, but the Fist King waved it off, saying he was only joking. Then he requested writing tools. He needed to send a letter. The physician moved quickly to retrieve the items from the desk. As the Fist King continued eating, he explained that he would dictate and the physician would write. The man agreed. He began speaking, telling him to write that due to Sir Lee Jinion's severe illness, he would need to remain in the villa for some time, and then added a curious line that this life of his was too stubbornly long and asked what should be done next. At that final line, the physician hesitated. He hadn't written it down. The Fist King noticed immediately and asked why he had stopped. The physician, returning to his fake smile, tried to brush off the remark, but before he could speak further, a chopstick flew through the air. It struck the wall beside him with such force that it pierced through the wood and grazed the physician's neck. A thin line of blood trickled down. The physician raised his fingers to the wound, stunned. The young master explained, to a healthy person, the soup might be a tonic, but to someone as sick as Jinion had been, it was as good as poison. A competent physician should have known that. He then accused the man of secretly checking his pulse after realizing he hadn't died. The physician tried to claim he had simply been surprised, but the Fist King continued. Most importantly, the man had not even tried to hide his intent to kill. Wasn't acting alone. So now the Fist King ordered him to write the name of whoever had given him the command. The physician protested, asking how he could suspect someone as kind-hearted as himself. But the performance was over. He sighed and dropped the act entirely, revealing his true face, sly, bitter, and venomous. He admitted that even a scoundrel like the young master had a conscience, and that he had foolishly tried to let the young master pass with dignity. Now exposed, he knew what had to be done. He would kill all the servants and silence them. While hiding a thin needle between his fingers, he stepped forward, calling out softly. But the Fist King had already stood and struck him directly on the head, cutting him off mid-thought. As he bit into a piece of chicken, he warned the physician not to let his thoughts wander while being spoken to. The hit had injured his own hand, and the sting reminded him of just how weak this body still was. He needed to regain his strength soon. Once he recovered, it wouldn't matter even if the entire Una merchant group stood against him. He would crush them all. When he returns to the group, his first step would be investigating Gong Sun Myung. Suddenly, pain surged through his head. A headache sharp and sudden. Memories that were not his own began pouring in. fragments and flashes that painted a different life. These were Lee Jinion's memories. It began to make sense. Lee Jinion, the first son of the powerful Yunhua merchant group, had lived his life in shadows. He lacked the intelligence of his second brother, the strength of his third, and the presence of any meaningful ambition. He tried to fill the void with wealth, drowning himself in indulgence. Women, alcohol, gambling, a life wasted. By the time he realized the damage he had done, his health had already been destroyed. He was sent to the villa to be forgotten. If these memories were true, then even the main family had abandoned him. This place was nothing more than an exile. At first, being reborn into this body without its memories had been troubling. But now that they had returned, he could finally focus on what mattered: martial arts. To think such a gifted physical frame had been wasted infuriated him. With his knowledge from a past life and access to rare elixirs, he could climb to power again. And now, surrounded by gold and wealth, he realized something else. There was nothing he couldn't afford. All he had was money. He turned, spotting the shelves filled with treasures and valuables. It was enough. And beside it, still resting on the table, was the head of the physician. He had nearly forgotten. He would bury him later. Morning came, and with it, the scent of blood still lingered faintly beneath the sakura leaves drifting through the breeze. A year had passed. At the gate of the villa, a man approached and greeted the two maids. He mentioned to them that he carried a letter for the young master and asked where he could find him. The women turned and gestured toward the figure sitting near the garden. From where he stood, the visitor could only see the man's back, broad, muscular, and defined. His eyes widened in disbelief. That couldn't be him, but it was. Several seasons had passed since his reincarnation, and during that time, the Fist King's energy core had finally manifested. Through intense, continuous training, he engraved into this new body every martial art essential for survival. Among them were the enlightened mobility art, the enlightened body art, rapid stride, and one that allowed him to manipulate lightning itself, the white lightning 10-phase art. So far, he had reached the 4th phase. Everything had been progressing smoothly. His body had become finely sculpted, honed through tireless effort. He had even developed enough control and precision to cut a falling leaf in half with a single movement. Yet despite all his progress, something still felt off. It wasn't enough. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out his name. A young man approached him, introducing himself as Mok Inseop of the guard squad. He had brought a letter from the main clan. As he extended his hand, the young master reached for the letter, but the guard remained momentarily stunned, unable to hide his shock at the transformation before him. The frail, stiff, reckless person he once knew was gone. He questioned in silence whether this could truly be the same man, wondering where the weakling he remembered had vanished to. But the young master's hand was still extended, unmoving. He calmly reminded the man that his arm was about to fall off. Snapping out of his daze, the young guard handed him the letter. They both sat down as the letter was opened and read. The message was grim. The clan's leader, his father, had collapsed. There was no explanation for the illness. With the Yuna merchant group's head incapacitated, the burden of leadership was to be passed on to Lee Jinion. The young master looked up from the letter and asked if there had been any explanation for the collapse. The guard believed it was most likely related to the Ouyang clan. He reminded the young master of how the merchant group had been paying tribute disguised as protection fees. Those fees had recently been increased without reason and had now become unbearable. Curious, the young master asked if the Ouyang clan had done anything to justify this sudden raise. The guard's calm tone turned to anger. He claimed they had done nothing and called them dogs. Even when the little deity sect had tried to impose ridiculous tribute taxes recently, the Ouyang clan refused to act, claiming they would only meet with the main clan if a serious issue arose. No action was taken, and no opposition was raised, even by the guard captain. And that was because they were dealing with Ouyang Hu, a name the young master recognized. Ouyang Hu's reputation was well known across the Jianghu. He was powerful enough that even the Fist King, in his past life, had heard of him. It was no surprise that such a figure would look down on merchant groups entirely. The young master asked if simply dealing with the Ouyang clan would resolve everything. The question made the guard nervous, unsure of what to say. He explained that there was another reason behind the father's collapse. A sword fight had broken out between the second and third sons. Their father had witnessed it himself, and the shock of it had caused him to collapse. The young master asked if the collapse had been from anger. The guard confirmed it. Hearing that his brothers had engaged in a sword fight in front of their ill father was beyond disgraceful. But before the guard could reassure him that everything would be fine in time, the young master stood. He declared that he could not sit back and watch. The letter was handed back to the guard. He would go himself. The guard returned to the others with news of what had happened. He told his companions that the young master had completely changed. His body was powerful, his presence commanding, but no one took him seriously. One of them burst into laughter, mocking the very idea. Another joked about the young master becoming a master of bedroom techniques. Someone scoffed that if that scoundrel was a martial artist, then he himself must be a legendary one. Others dismissed the tale as pure fantasy, saying that even the vice captain having a lover would be more believable. But that last comment was overheard. Han Yap, the vice captain of the Yuna Merchant Group's guard squad, appeared behind them. Without hesitation, he crushed the skull of the man who made the joke. Though others remained skeptical, Han Yap believed what he had heard. He had always known the young master's physique was innately strong since childhood. Now seeing the signs, he believed the transformation. Han Yap asked if the guard knew when the young master would return. The man admitted he didn't know, only that he was coming. Before the sentence could even finish, a shout rang out. Someone screamed that the young master had arrived. Everyone turned. The man who had been crushed earlier now stood with his hair disheveled, recovering from the earlier blow. He hurried to prepare, saying they needed to greet the young master. Another man questioned whether they really needed to do so for someone like him, but Han Yap silenced the protest. He reminded them who put food in their mouths and told them to stop whining. The time to move had come. The young master approached the grand estate. It was massive, a place of great scale and opulence. He had only ever heard stories of the Yuna Merchant Group's wealth, but now, seeing it firsthand, he understood just how far beyond ordinary wealth this place stood. Li Jinian had not simply been well off. He had been born into luxury. Greeting the maids, he told them he would visit his father immediately and gave them permission to rest. But one question remained in his mind. Why had no one come to welcome him? Then turning his head, he saw them, a formation of swordsmen lined up with their blades raised in greeting. At the front, kneeling, was Han Yop, who congratulated him on his safe return and introduced himself formally. Looking on, one of the guards was stunned by what he was witnessing. The vice captain, kneeling. Did he have no pride? He recalled how the young master had looked down on others before and assumed he would just be mocked again. But something else happened. The formality left them in shock. Han Yap, smiling with genuine relief, offered to escort him to his father's room. The others remained frozen. The young master had acknowledged them with respect. The guard whispered to the others that he had told them of the change. Another admitted it. The atmosphere truly felt different, like stepping into a stranger's home. Han Yop, still smiling, could sense it too. For the first time, the young master did not feel like an enemy, but an ally. The vice captain led the way and opened the gates. He told the young master that the father had already been informed of his visit. The young master thanked him. But before they could proceed, someone else arrived. A man approached from behind and laid a hand on the young master's shoulder. It was Li Jian, the third son. He addressed the young master mockingly, referring to him with his old insult. But as he stared at his brother's face, he noticed something different. The young master now looked serious. He could glare. His grip on the shoulder tightened. The vice captain grew tense. The situation was bad. The third brother had always treated the young master poorly. Now it looked like he was about to strike again. Jian used to kick him down, call him names, treat him as worthless. The vice captain stepped in, grabbing Jian's hand and reminding them that both brothers had met after a long time and that they must be glad to see each other. But Jian smacked the vice captain aside. He didn't appreciate being touched. He accused the vice captain of getting too comfortable and wondered if he needed to be taught a lesson. The young master finally addressed his brother by name. He brushed his hand across Joyeon's cheek, prompting a question. What was he doing? Then without hesitation, the young master smacked him across the face. Blood flew from Jaeyeon's mouth. The vice captain watched in stunned silence. Jaeyeon was in shock. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. But the young master wasn't finished. He told his brother that he had come here full of excitement. Grabbing his brother's shoulder, he squeezed, forcing Jaeyeon to his knees. His brother screamed and cursed, but the young master repeated his insult back at him. Insane bastard, and corrected him. He should be calling him Big Brother. Outside the room of the Yuna merchant group's leader, a crowd had gathered, murmuring about the ruckus that had just taken place. Among them was a man who had just arrived, Lee Hwa-eon, the second son and overseer of the group. He approached, puzzled by the commotion, and questioned the vice captain and the others about what had happened. The vice captain turned to him and explained that there had been an argument between the first and third young masters. The second son's immediate thought was that the third must have harassed the first again, prompting him to ask why no one had stepped in to stop them. He appeared genuinely concerned for his older brother, but when he entered the room, what he saw brought him to a halt. The young master was casually pinching the third son's ear, telling him to be quiet in front of their father's door. The roles were completely reversed. The second son was stunned, expecting the opposite. There on the table between them sat a pot of hot tea. He walked over and calmly took a seat, pouring himself a cup. The young master eventually did the same. Meanwhile, the third son remained seated on the floor with his arms raised in punishment. The second son began the conversation, mentioning that he had heard about the young master's return and commented that he seemed healthy. The young master answered that he was fine now, but his gaze shifted to the bandage around his brother's hand. He asked whether the third had been the one to cause the injury. The second son admitted that he had. Before he could finish explaining that it wasn't serious, the young master stood abruptly and struck the third son across the face, causing blood to spurt from his nose. He told him firmly that one should never draw a sword against an older brother. The third son quickly mumbled an, "Okay," but the young master found that answer lacking. He repeated the word with a sharp tone, prompting the third to correct himself with a proper, "I understand." The third son still couldn't believe what was happening. The young master, who had once been weak enough to be bullied, was now strong enough to beat him into submission. He remembered how he used to kick him around and even make him massage his back. The second son was equally surprised. Back then, avoiding beatings had been the most the young master could manage. Still in disbelief, the second son asked if something had happened to him at the safe house. The young master dodged the question by shifting his attention to the stack of letters on the table. He picked one up and asked what it was. The second son explained that it was a list of employees to bring to the merchant group's conference the following day. As he scanned the list, the young master spotted a familiar name, the physicians. Curious, he looked for the recommender. The name written beside it was Young-hoo. It wasn't just the physician. All the names on the list, from the vice squad leader to the front gate guards, had been recommended by him. The young master called out both of his brothers' names. He asked them plainly, if either of them were cooperating with the Uyang clan, they needed to confess now. The room fell into silence. Both brothers were visibly stunned by the question. The second son responded first, asking if he really thought such a thing was possible. The third son looked furious and indignant, declaring that he would rather die than hand over their merchant group to an outside clan. He called the group their father's legacy, something to protect. His voice trembled slightly, but he ended each sentence with a respectful, "Sir," revealing how much he now feared the young master. The second son backed him up. The young master listened and then nodded. He told them that he was glad to hear it, because it meant he wouldn't have to kill them. He then asked whether all the higher-ups would be attending the next day's conference. The second son confirmed that they would. In response, the young master simply said he would be attending as well and left the room. The second son called out to ask where he was going. The answer came plainly, to see father. As the young master walked away, the second son remained still, unable to shake his curiosity about what had happened at the safe house. Meanwhile, the third son fumed, pulling at his hair in frustration. He muttered bitterly that it should have been him who was sent to Juhua Mountain. At that moment, a maid approached the group leader's room and quietly informed him that his eldest son had come to visit. Li Xiongmin, bedridden but still the merchant group's leader. The young master entered. He looked at his father lying in bed and was asked about the noise outside. The young master brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Then he addressed the matter directly. He had heard about his father's condition, and that stress was the cause. His father confirmed it, saying that although he had lived under stress for years, his aging body could no longer withstand it. He then looked at his son, studying his face closely. He remarked that he looked different now, even asking if he was truly Jinyeon. Still, he expressed his happiness at seeing his son doing well. The young master felt something strange. In his previous life, he had never known what it was like to have a father. But in Lee Jinyeon's memories, his father had always been a powerful, proud figure. A man who once held his hand when he was a child, just like now. But now that hand felt small and fragile. He told his father not to worry. The source of stress could be removed. Rubbing his father's hand gently, he promised to take care of it all. When his father asked what he meant by eliminate, the young master smiled and dismissed it as nothing. But the look in his eyes and his smile said otherwise. The following day, the merchant group conference took place. Young-hoo was in attendance. Not only the leader of the guard squad, but also a martial master of the Young clan. The other clan members sat whispering to each other. One of them leaned toward Young-hoo, gesturing subtly toward the young man who had just arrived. He asked if that was truly the eldest son and what he was doing here. Young-hoo kept chewing on a stick and smirked, amused. Then he answered, guessing the young master was probably worried about his standing in the group. At the head of the meeting, the second son began leading the discussion. He asked if anyone had objections to the next decision, and if not, they would proceed. But then a voice interrupted. It was Young-hoo. He stood commenting on how he had heard the first young master didn't yet have a personal guard. He offered a recommendation of his own. The smugness in his tone didn't go unnoticed. Whispers broke out. One man leaned to a woman nearby, pointing out how half of the merchant group's personnel were already affiliated with the Young clan. He asked if Young-hoo didn't know when to stop. The woman urged him to quiet down, but he pressed on, asking what he had said that was wrong. Before he could finish, his glass of tea shattered in his hand, cutting his fingers. Young-hoo casually explained that his hand had slipped. Then, with a sarcastic apology, he asked the room if anyone else had comments about his suggestion. Silence followed, until one voice cut through. The young master stood and announced that he had complaints and a suggestion of his own. He proposed that Young-hoo be removed from his position as guard squad leader. Gasps filled the room. Shock spread across Young-hoo's face. Members of the Young clan began pushing back. One of them laughed, asking if the young master even understood how much Young-hoo had done for the group's security. Another called the suggestion a joke. Young-hoo addressed the young master directly. He asked if he truly wanted to fire him and implied that his illness had made him forget his place, implying that it is not the young master's decision. The young master stared at him. Then he smirked. Without warning, he slammed his fist into the floor, the impact cracking the ground beneath them. Young-hoo froze as the young master reminded him that perhaps it was Young-hoo who had forgotten. His position had made him arrogant, but the Yuna merchant group, it belonged to him. As the young master walked earlier to the General Assembly, his second brother followed behind. He asked whether the true reason he wanted to attend was to dismiss the guard captain, Young-hoo. The young master didn't answer immediately, so the second son shared his own view, that they were just a merchant group. They were out of their depth, he warned, trying to oppose someone like that. The young master stopped walking. He turned his head slightly and asked his brother if he understood what happened to people in the Jonghu who underestimated martial artists. Before the second brother could respond, the young master answered his own question. Those who made that mistake got devoured. They were standing on high ground, and the young master gestured outward, telling his brother to look at the state of the Yuna merchant group. He asked if it didn't already look like they were being devoured. The second brother looked out and silently admitted he was right. When had the Young clan grown to such numbers within their walls? But the young master reassured him. He told his brother not to worry, that he, as the eldest, would handle it. Though the second son smiled nervously at the phrasing, thinking back at that moment and what is happening now, this was the young master's way of handling things. Back in the assembly hall, the atmosphere remained tense. After the young master had shattered the ground, several members of the Ouyang clan had stepped forward, drawing their swords. They demanded to know the meaning of such madness. Their blades were now raised toward the young master, who remained calm. Ouyang stood behind them, expression tightening with unease. He wondered if the young master had truly lost his mind. The vice captain stepped forward, furious. He barked at the swordsmen, asking how they dared to draw their weapons against the young master. Then, turning to the young master himself, he asked him to please step back so they could protect him. But the young master didn't retreat. He addressed the Ouyang swordsman directly, calmly agreeing that yes, it was truly insolent. Then he flipped their actions on them. What kind of madness made them think it was acceptable to raise their blades against their employer? Their grips on their swords faltered. Unease spread among them. The young master told them that if they truly wished for death, they could have it. Still, because he did feel somewhat sorry for the guard captain, he would consider what was about to happen a form of compensation. Ouyang furrowed his brow and asked what he meant by feeling sorry. The young master explained. He pitied him for ruining his retirement. He began to reveal everything. From the moment he had left to recuperate, the physician Gongsun Myung had been sent to assassinate him. Ouyang had engineered a clash between the second and third sons, knowing that bad blood between siblings would make everything easier. As a result, their father collapsed. Had Ouyang swayed even one of the brothers completely, he could have taken control of the Una merchant group without ever lifting a finger. Ouyang had puppeteered the brothers like dolls tied to his fingers. Ouyang began to laugh hysterically, calling it all nonsense. The young master took a step forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. He told him that the very Gongsun Myung, who was meant to kill him, had died by his hands instead. A chill ran through Ouyang body. The young master continued. That moment had been when fate had shifted. Ouyang now rattled, asked if Gongsun truly died by his hand. The young master confirmed it. He told him not to be too sad. He had sent him off with a single strike. He added that if Ouyang truly wanted to devour a major merchant group, he should have done better. Then almost casually, he remarked that perhaps he'd also send in a damage claim for what Ouyang had cost them. That pushed Ouyang over the edge. Furious, he called the young master an arrogant brat and raised his fist, channeling his energy. But this was exactly what the young master had planned. He had baited him, and now he was angry, just as intended. As Ouyang powered up his palm, declaring that the young master had a death wish, the young master did the same. Their fists collided in the middle of the hall, unleashing wind and shock waves that blew debris in every direction. From the impact, Ouyang realized something. The energy he felt was lightning. The young master had learned martial arts. They both stepped back. Members of the Ouyang clan looked stunned. One of them couldn't believe the young master had blocked the guard captain's strike. Another marveled at his skill, clearly shocked that he knew martial arts at all. The young master mocked Ouyang with a question, asking him if it is really acceptable to strike someone who had just finished recuperating. But then, with a smirk, he added that it was fine since this was an official duel. Ouyang gritted his teeth, furious. To him, the young master was like a chick just learning to fly. Still, he turned to the crowd and loudly declared that with the young master's consent, and witnessed by the Ouyang clan and guard squad alike, they would proceed with an official duel. He asked the young master if that was acceptable. The young master objected. It would be a life-or-death duel. Raising his fists, he prepared for battle. Ouyang was momentarily caught off guard by the confidence. He admitted aloud that the young master must have trained under an impressive sect. His skill had advanced far too quickly, but experience was still on his side. He lunged forward with his sword, boasting that he would show the young master the difference that experience makes. The young master dodged the strike with ease, mocking the remark. Ouyang was stunned at the speed. With his left hand behind his back and lightning crackling through his other fist, the young master chastised Ouyang for daring to talk about experience. He surged forward and punched Ouyang square in the stomach, sending him flying backward. Blood sprayed from Ouyang mouth as he flew, unable to comprehend the strength behind the blow. But the young master wasn't done. He used the enlightened mobility art to close the distance in an instant, catching up to Ouyang in midair and throwing another punch. This time, Yang-hu managed to block it with his sword and tried to stabilize his stance on his feet. They clashed again. Yang-hu was struggling to keep up. He blocked and dodged frantically, but the young master's speed and control were overwhelming. Something felt wrong. This didn't feel like a newly trained martial artist. As he looked at the young master's stance, he saw the image of a blue, shredded martial arts figure. The aura was unmistakable. It felt like facing a seasoned martial master. Desperate, Yang-hu activated his skill. A pink aura ignited around his sword. His clan members, recognizing the technique, grew excited. They were sure this would be the end of it. He initiated the three-form sword art, declaring that he would not lose to a brat. But in that moment, the young master moved. Using rapid stride, he crouched and dashed low to the ground, moving faster than Yang-hu could register. He was there, directly beneath him. With lightning gathered in his fist, he struck upward under Yang-hu's chin. The blow launched Yang-hu into the air, breaking through the ceiling. Every pair of eyes, from the second brother to the vice captain, even the maids and distant onlookers, turned upward in shock. From a far building, Lee Seungmin saw it too. A man standing beside him asked what had just happened. He answered calmly. It was his son, and it appeared that he had learned martial arts. Yang-hu came crashing down. His clan members rushed to him, calling out in panic. One of them lifted him and turned to the young master, spitting the word brat. The young master calmly asked if he wanted to die next. The room went quiet. The Yang clan members, gritting their teeth, could barely contain their anger. One of them spoke up. He admitted that the duel had no irregularities and testified as such, but warned that if the Yang clan were to seek revenge through formal duels going forward, the Yunha merchant group would have no means to avoid them. The statement made the rest of the Yunha members tense up. The young master remained unfazed. He answered that it was fine. He never hoped to be free from grudges. Kindness would be repaid and grudges would be paid back as well. And if anyone had an issue with that, he alone would take the responsibility, not the Yunha merchant group. The second brother urged him that this path was dangerous, but the young master turned and replied that the group belonged to him and to their father. It belonged to the guard squad who welcomed him home and the maids who found joy in watching him eat. Their Unha merchant group would no longer be toyed with by trash like the Yang clan. He told them to get lost. They were all fired. Shock rippled through the hall, yet no one objected. The Yang clan, furious, turned and left, but not without a final sarcastic wish that the young master enjoy his newfound position. As they left, the young master stood surrounded only by his own people. One of the guards couldn't contain it and burst out in a cheer. The vice captain quickly tried to silence him. Still, he admitted that they should be ashamed. The guard squad had stood still and watched. The young master then turned to his brother and asked him to buy an elixir. After all, if he was taking responsibility, he should receive a bit of support. The second brother agreed and promised to get the finest tonic. He also noted that with everything going on, elixir purchases, hiring guards, the young master would be very busy. Speaking of guards, he had someone in mind. Elsewhere, a scarred man sat between two large guards bearing the news. The events of the duel had reached him. He looked up and asked the person delivering the news if he was certain. Was it truly Lee Jinian? A few days earlier, on the first day of the young master's official return to the Yunha merchant group, he had turned to the vice captain and casually asked if he had eaten. The vice captain, surprised by the question, confirmed that he hadn't. He had been working since dawn. The young master glanced downward. Across from them were members of the Yang clan guard, slacking off, laughing, and idling away time, while only a single Unha guard stood at his post, doing his job. It baffled the young master. Some didn't even have time to eat from overwork, while others had the freedom to laze about during duty. He thought to himself how easy they had it, leeching off the hard work of others. He clenched the bridge rail in his hand, and then without realizing it, the section he gripped crumbled in his hand. The vice captain called his name in concern, snapping him back. The young master pulled his hand away, watching the pieces fall. The problem wasn't simply the slackers, it was who would replace them. He needed someone to take their place. He glanced across at a nearby building. That was where they were. Inside, the place was lively and noisy. A gambling hall and bar combined. There was drinking, smoking, and idle games. As soon as the young master stepped in, whispers started. One man nudged another and asked if that was the old pushover, whispering that he was the Unimerchant Group's young master. Another remarked that they hadn't seen him in ages. He might as well have been dead. Yet another snickered that he wanted to see how much money he'd waste this time, remembering his old habits. Toward the back was a sealed room, guarded by a man who recognized the young master instantly. With a crooked grin, the guard greeted him, asking if he was back to being a sucker again. He laughed, asking if the young master was here to make another generous donation. The guard scowled but did as told. Inside the room sat the man from before, between two large guards. He looked up and commented on the young master's appearance. He seemed healthier. He chuckled, guessing that recuperation must have done wonders for him. This man was known as the Poisonous Fox, Chul Myung-ho. His guards greeted the young master, surprised to see him, but Chul scolded them, calling them heartless punks. He reminded them that his friend had been sick and just recovered, and the least they could do was ask how he was. They apologized, saying they didn't know. The young master took a seat as Chul kept talking, going on about how long it had been. Chul Myung-ho and Lee Jin-yeon had known each other since childhood, but their so-called friendship had been one-sided, filled with beatings and extortion. Chul used to bully him and take his money. The young master now sat across from him, thinking how oddly the word friend seemed to be used by some people. Then he placed a heavy bag on the table, filled with money. Chul grinned, telling him that since he was finally back, he should have some fun. Surely after all that time lying in bed, he was itching for action. But in truth, it was Chul who was itching. He had lost his favorite victim, and now the pushover was back. He leaned forward, announcing that to celebrate the return, he would treat him to something grand. But the young master's silence unsettled him. He asked why he was so quiet. It was starting to irritate him. The young master replied that he was thinking. Chul asked what he was thinking about, unaware that the young master was weighing whether or not to kill him. He wasn't interested in Chul. He was after the two guards. The twins beside Chul were the ones doing all his dirty work. They were probably living as thugs under his command, used to rough people up and collect money. They were being wasted. Chul asked again if the young master was listening to him. The twins stood on either side of him, unaware. Then the young master finally spoke. He said he had made up his mind. Then he told Chul to hand over the vault key. Chul blinked. Vault key? He asked if the young master needed money. The young master confirmed it. He would take cash for now. He listed off his demands. The thousands of nyang he had been forced to invest in this den, the interest, the money extorted from him, and the medical bills from being beaten up. Adding it all up, the young master figured 100,000 yang would be fair. And even then, he wondered if he was being too generous. Chul burst into laughter. He joked that the young master must have studied mathematics while recovering. Laughing as he stood up, he mocked him. Did he think the vault only had 100,000 yang? There was jewelry, gold, silver, but none of it was for him. He placed a hand on the young master's shoulder and pointed at the vault. If he needed money, he said, just ask. He'd lend it. Then, voice turning serious, he asked why the young master had ignored him this whole time. He accused him of acting fragile when he was sick, but now scowling and demanding vault keys. He shouted in his face, calling him a bastard, and asked if he knew who he was. Still, the young master said nothing. Chul began to lose control. Frustrated by the silence, he shouted again, asking if he had a death wish, if the cat had gotten his tongue. Then he ordered the twins to pin him down and beat some sense into him. They obeyed immediately. One grabbed the young master from under the arm, the other by his clothes from behind. But neither could move him. The young master spoke calmly. He told Chul that he had even gone through the trouble of showing him kindness. Then he grabbed one of the twins by the wrist, lifted him, and flung him across the room. He crashed into the wall. The other twin charged in retaliation, but was swept off his feet and sent crashing to the floor. But something caught the young master's attention. Both twins rose again, their wrists and ankles clearly shattered, and yet there was no fear in their eyes. They came at him again, determined. That was all the proof the young master needed. They were the real deal. They attacked in unison, but the young master vanished. They looked around in confusion. The young master was behind them. With both hands, he grabbed them by their bald heads and knocked them together. The collision echoed through the room. He told them to stay down and warned them not to make him say it twice. They obeyed. The young master stood, eyes now set on the final one left in the room, Chul Myung-ho. He looked nervous now that he is alone. The young master looked at him, smiling faintly. Now it was just his dear friend who remained.